Yuno versus Lucius. A battle with humanity on the line is gearing up for round 3 as chaos ensues in the Clover Kingdom's capital, with the recently defeated paladins all activating the second phase of their boss fights, putting the Magic Knights even more in the corner than they already were, pushing our tired and broken heroes way past their limits, all while Asta, the sole hope for humanity's survival, lies on death's door, putting the fate of the world entirely in the hands of Mimosa. And look, for the most part, this is an action chapter, focusing heavily on the one-on-one rematch between Yuno and Lucius, which I mean, yeah, makes sense. That was the big cliffhanger we left on with the previous batch of chapters, Yuno being gifted with anti-magic after Asta and Libe took that big hit from the fake Wizard King, leaving our favorite Wind Boy to hold the line against Lucius until the two can fully recover. However, there is quite a bit more to talk about in this chapter, some interesting setups for future fights, a moral decision that a certain orange-haired flower girl has to make, and some very interesting and surprising characters making their grand return to the story. Most notably, our boy Leo. You see, there he is, right there, all the way in the bottom corner. So exciting to finally see him again after what feels like years of being absent. And look, he's so excited to be back that he's already trying his best to help out by shooting fire right off the page. So helpful. But don't worry, this will not be the only sighting of Leo we get in this batch of chapters. There will be another, but that is for a future video. For now, let's get back to Yuno. Because I gotta say, the first thing that I thought when I saw him in the opening of this chapter is, he is him. Due to the Spade Prince just casually floating there with his brand new anti-magic look, or farming so hard that even Finral couldn't help but comment on it. And look, he's not the only one, because the second Lucius sees the power Yuno now has after being gifted Asta's anti-magic, he immediately realizes that this is a problem. This right here made him nervous. Even more so than when both Yuno and Asta showed up at his door ready to fight, because now he essentially had to fight both of them fused in one body, which means he could no longer play games, deciding very quickly to go on an all-out attack against the prince, which Yuno answers back with his own massive counterattack, a giant tornado mixed with anti-magic called Black Tornado Fang. And before we move on to the rest of this fight, I just want to highlight how amazing the art was in this chapter. Each time I look at that panel of Lucius shooting out that random assortment of magic at Yuno, I find a new detail I didn't notice before. At first, my eyes focused in on the giant centipede-looking creatures he created, because in my initial reading of the chapter, that was the only thing I could identify. Everything else just looked like a giant cloud of stuff. But then, on my second reading, I noticed that right next to the centipedes were these bird-shaped creatures. Honestly, they look a bit like Latias and Latios from Pokemon. And as far as I can tell, they're either made of water or mercury magic based on how fluid they look and the shading he gave them. And then on my third reading, I noticed that in the upper left corner of the attack, there are horses made of lightning. I still haven't figured out exactly what that fourth magic he's using is, but it's definitely also a creature of some kind because you can clearly see that it has claws. Based on the way it looks, I say that it's most likely some kind of large feline made out of magma. Point is though, that this art was simply just amazing. Don't get me wrong, Tabata's art has always been really good, and it was only during periods where his health was in the decline that we've ever really seen any dip in the quality. And even then, in my opinion, it was always still pretty decent. But ever since he made the jump from the weekly magazine over to Giga, his art has been hitting new heights, which definitely makes the months we had to wait for the new chapters feel worth it. But getting back to the fight, Yuno is showing off exactly why Lucius should be afraid of having this rematch, just easily slashing through every attack sent his way. Though admittedly, it is taking him some time to get used to using the Devil Dweller, making a note of just how heavy it is and how impressive it is that Asta was able to use it so easily. And this was one of his lighter swords. I can only imagine how much trouble Yuno would be in had Asta thrown him to Demon Slayer instead. Lucius wouldn't have to even try to beat him because Yuno would just be laid out on the floor trying to lift the thing. Though, speaking of Lucius, I do have to give him credit for so quickly noticing that Yuno was having trouble using the sword, and it was during this brief period where he landed his only real hit on him. Didn't help much though, the fight was still mostly in Yuno's favor throughout the entire chapter, but I will give credit where credit is due. There's also a moment where it seems like Yuno has landed a pretty crucial blow on Lucius, after snapping his sword in half, only for us to discover that this Lucius is yet another clone, with the real him sneaking up behind Yuno using Golder's permutation magic to hide his presence, and tries to use his soul magic to turn Yuno into another one of his paladins. But Yuno ended up seeing right through it, creating an anti-magic fueled Neverland around the two of them, erasing the clone and stopping the sneak attack. landing its first clean hit on the real Lucius. And again, we have to give Lucius credit. This was a pretty decent strategy. Honestly, I'm not even sure how Yuno was able to see through it so quickly, given that permutation magic is supposed to be undetectable. The only reason why Asta was able to see through it back in chapter 55 was because he was using Ki to sense cold air, which, as far as we know, Yuno can't use. So, the only two options I can think of is that either the anti-magic homed in on two targets, alerting Yuno to an attack coming from behind him, or that Bell was able to somehow sense Lucius and warned Yuno ahead of time. Though, I guess the third viable answer would be that by now, Yuno is so used to fighting clones at this point that he's able to tell the difference between them and the real one. But this was Lucius's best shot at taking down Yuno, because unlike with Asta, he can't play mind games with him to catch him off guard. Sure, he could do the same thing he did with Lishta and pull out the former King of Spades to use as a shield, but Yuno doesn't have the same connection with his father that Asta does with his mother. Which is weird to say, considering both grew up without their parents. But Asta does have his connection to Libe, who did have that familial connection to her, which he got to somewhat experience through Libe's memories. While Yuno, even though he did get a glimpse of his time in the Spade Kingdom before being brought to Clover, didn't get to experience that same connection. Hell, we don't even see his dad in the manga version of that little trip down memory lane, we only meet him in the anime. So yeah, the only real option Lucius had to win this fight was to use underhanded tricks to catch Yuno off guard. But since that failed, he has to resort to plan B, which is simply to hold off long enough for the anti-magic to run out. Because keep in mind, even though it does seem like Yuno has an unlimited amount of anti-magic in this chapter, and Asta probably did give him more than he gave to everyone else, he does still have only a set amount, which means once that runs out, he will be back to just his wind and star magic. And look, this sounds like a good idea at first, because once the anti-magic runs out, Yuno won't be strong enough to beat this new powered-up Lucius, at least not alone. But the problem comes in that the longer he has to focus on this fight and this fight alone, the longer it'll take him to win this war. Which just means more time for the so-called flaw of this world to get healed up and back into this fight. And that same trick isn't going to work twice. Sure, they won't cut through their mom, but Asta and Libe won't be flashbanged by her showing up like they were in the last chapter, which means Lucius won't get another free shot on them. And considering the two were already holding their own, and still have yet to go into their true double union, Asta coming back is not something Lucius can afford to let happen. As of right now, his only option is to rely on one of his paladins to finish Asta off, but two of the three of them are pretty busy at the moment. Aesir was gearing up for round 2 against her kids before Yuno tagged herself in, which is a fight I hope we get to see play out in a future chapter. If not, then when the anime eventually gets to this part, we need to see it play out there. And while we don't get a chance to see him in this chapter, we can assume Morgan is still busy with Nock and the Yami siblings. Morse is the only one that actually makes an attempt to take out Asta, attacking both him and Mimosa. Who, quick side note, Mimosa gets put in a really tight spot in this chapter, and she's forced to make a really hard decision, especially for a character like her. Because due to all the healing she's been doing throughout this war, basically being the only reason why most of the Magic Knights and civilians have survived this long, she now doesn't have enough mana to fully heal Asta. The only thing she can do is take what little she has left and focus it on him, but if she does that, then she'll be leaving everyone who's still badly wounded for dead. And I really love this small part of the chapter because you can really see the anguish on her face and just how much this choice is weighing on her. Because healing is who she is, it's what she built her entire career as a Magic Knight on at this point, and just like any good healer, she can't even stomach the idea of leaving someone for dead when she knows she could have saved them. And even if she wanted to, she knows Asta would never want her to make that choice just to save him. He'd much rather her leave him behind and save the others. But even with Yuno's power-up, it's only a matter of time before Lucius ends up winning. Asta is their only real hope for surviving this whole ordeal, which means healing him should be their top priority, even if it means sacrificing the others. It really is a hard choice, and lucky for her, it's one that she doesn't end up having to make, as the Magic Knights she was healing actively choose to sacrifice themselves in order for her to escape with Asta, showing that they have so much faith that Asta can save humanity that they're willing to give up their own lives. And look, make no mistake, those Magic Knights, they're dead. Even if they somehow managed to beat the angels and to kill them, their wounds were way too severe for them to last long. So for all of you out there who need to dread a death in order to see stakes in the story, there you go. Characters actively had to die in order for Mimosa to have a chance to heal Asta. But that chance does get quickly interrupted by Morris's unfortunate arrival. I say unfortunate because, like I've stated many times before, fuck Morris. But again, I am a man who gives credit where credit is due. And even though I personally would have liked for any other character to be the one to attempt to stand in Mimosa's way, it being Morris led to one of the most exciting moments of this entire saga. As the Diamond Kingdom squad, led by Mars, make their grand return to the story, looking not only to get their revenge against the Paladin for the many crimes he committed against their home, but to finally make good on their promise to help Asta when he needs the most. And we'll see more of that promise and their epic return in the next video.